Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, great to see you. Now, today is the second part in our series going in-depth on a particular part of the figure and anatomy. The first part is here, and if you've not seen it, it's a great scaffold for both basic figuring on its own, but also it's made to be a very solid scaffold to place on musculature. But we'll quickly revise the parts you'll need for today anyway. Now on to the second part, the neck and shoulders. Now I do apologise for the wait, I may have let scope creep get away from me, but you'll hopefully get a really cool resource as a result, so I hope it's worth the wait. Now before we get in, if you like these videos and you want to see more like them or see them more often, hit like, hit subscribe, give it a comment. They're doing a second adpocalypse from the looks of it, so if you've not done that before, now would be a great time. And if you are in a position to do so, you could consider joining the Patreon. For those that are considering it and those that already are, firstly, thank you. And secondly, I've got some plans in the next month or so to revamp the Patreon rewards so as not to neglect my supporters anymore. There's also a homework sheet that'll be included in the description. If you want an activity, now feel free to pop that into the Discord and post it there. Now, on to the video, neck and shoulders. Now there's a lot to go through, so it can help to pause the video while you're drawing. And what I'll do, I'll add little pause points. We'll have this little icon and this noise to let you know this is a good point to pause, and I'll have some notes on screen to make it easier. So, figures are formed from the static shapes of the bones, and then the addition of dynamic elements like the musculature, then the fat, and hair, and clothing. Now, where bones individually don't change shape, the muscles do, and their shape is determined by the bones they stretch between. So bones in a different position will change the muscles to a different orientation, thus changing the outer shape of the figure. Now, there are a lot of bones and a lot of muscles, and the muscles are all layered. And while it's a really good idea to get to know the bones and muscles, you don't have to draw all of it every time. What I recommend instead is a simplified version of the skeleton and then a simplified version of the musculature over the top. Another thing you'll come to understand is that the musculature is an interconnected system with no clear sections. So there are muscle elements that form the shape of the shoulder and the underarm that begin all the way at the tailbone. So this series will have a lot of unavoidable revision as muscles common to multiple areas are covered multiple times. Now to begin, I've already covered how to make the base shapes in this series, but I'll revisit the absolute basics here again within the scope of what's necessary for the neck and shoulders. So we'll start with the upper half of the body. We'll decide how big we want the head to be, and we'll break that section off, with that section then split into thirds, the top three sections being for the ball for the head, one more section being for the chin, and the last section of fifths being for the neck. Then, we split the remaining length in half, with the top half being that sort of egg shape for the rib cage, and then we'll add balls for the shoulders, but about a third the length of the rib cage. Then, we'll add the pelvis. Now the pelvis will be about a third the length of the torso in height, and about half the length of the torso in width on a female character. Then we'll do the arms. Remembering that the wrists, the balls of the wrists, will be level with the bottom edge of the pelvis, and they build the hand out from beyond that. We then, on the shoulders, draw lines from the top of the shoulder balls into the center, and we then add the trapezius, so the traps, out on the side of the neck, so about a third of the way down the neck, out to the top of the shoulder ball. We then draw a V shape down from the corners of the neck into the center where the collarbones join, and then the limbs get divided into thirds to help do the shape. So for the upper arms on a female character, you can keep them straight, or you have them bulge for the first third and narrow for the next 2/3, or bulge for the first and bulge for the second 2/3. And then the upper arms will widen for the first third and then narrow for the next 2/3. And a male figure will work roughly the same. So decide how big you want the head, then place the rib cage as half the length of the remaining section of the torso, then place the pelvis. Now on a male character, the rib cage will be as wide as it is long. So both the length and width of the rib cage will be roughly half the length of the torso. Then we'll place the pelvis. The pelvis will be a third the length of the torso in height, and it'll be just slightly narrower than the rib cage in width. We then add the balls for the shoulders, which will be roughly a third to half the length of the rib cage. We place the arms down the same, remembering that the balls of the wrists will be roughly level with the bottom edge of the pelvis. We then place the balls of the elbows halfway along. We break the lengths of the arms into thirds. So for the upper arms, having it bulge for the first third of its length, and then bulge again for the 2/3 of its length. And then the upper arms, having them bulge for the first third, and then taper for the remaining 2/3. Then we place the details on the neck. So we've got the collarbones in, the lines from the top of the balls of the shoulders, across, into the center of the rib cage, and then we place the muscles from the corners of the neck in to join where the collarbones join. Once we've got that, we can make a line across the torso, about a third of its length down, for where the pecs will come down to. We then, along the collarbones, we divide them in half. And from the midsection of the collarbones, we make a diagonal line out down towards to make the deltoids, and the top edge of the pectoral. And then, from that band, 1/3 of the way down, we then make a line starting there and going up diagonally into the armpit as well, to make the rest of the shape of the pectoral. And we do the same thing on the female figure, because remember, women have pectoral muscles. That's why they can move their arms forwards. And now we'll do the band down the front for the abdominals. We're not going to go too much into this one, just because it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing today. But from the sides of that band that we're going to do for the abdominal, we're going to draw some lines diagonally down towards the corners of the rib cage to define where those ladder muscles are going to be on the side. So, short summary. Divide the head into fifths. Top 3 are for the ball for the head, 1 for the chin, and 1 for the neck. And then, along the remainder, we divide that out with, on both the male and female figure, the rib cage being half the length of the torso, and the pelvis being 1/3 the length of the torso. On both, the pelvis is half the length of the torso in width, and on the male figure, the rib cage is half the length wide, half the length tall. But on the female figure, the rib cage is half the length long, but only 1/3 of the length wide. And remembering that the wrist ball is level with the bottom of the pelvis, the elbow is in the middle between the shoulder and the wrist, and that the balls of these joints will taper from big to small as you move down the arm. As far as the depth of these sections, one easy rule of thumb is that they tend to be, on both a male and female figure, 1/4 the length of the torso is about the thickness of the bone masses of both the pelvis and the rib cage. Now, on the female figure, this is how to add the boobs. So very, very simply, we'll do a band around 1/3 of the way down, depending how big you want the boobs to be. We'll do an upside down love heart shape, starting at that point where the collarbones join, and coming up with a gap in the middle. Then, from that line, halfway along the collarbone, we'll do a V-shaped line in to show where there's no fatty tissue, that V shape in the middle, and we'll also use that edge of the pectoral as part of the mass of the breast. So the female breast, part of it, the mass of it, is actually the pectoral muscle, and it will follow the same shape, and it'll have the same crease there. So keep that in mind. Alright, so now we're going to go over and just sketch over these figures, and I'll talk very briefly about where we're going to do line art, and where we're going to do just the edge of tone, and why we're going to keep all those details in the sketch, even if we're not going to turn any of them into line art. So you can see now with some tone popped over the top, it's still useful to have the sketch there. So you can see on the pectoral on the male character, I've used line art for the sides, but not the bottom edge, and not the middle bit of the abs there, because there's no fold over. You can see if I use yellow and red, red is where I've put line art, and yellow is where I've just put an edge of a bit of tone. You can see the difference there is that with the areas where I've put line art, there's actually a division, there's an edge of an object. Whereas where I haven't, so where there's a yellow line, that one, there's no fold, there's no crease. There's a difference in the surfaces, and I want to keep that sketch. But the reason why we're keeping this sketch as part of what we do is that we don't want to have line art absolutely everywhere. We just want to have those shapes noted. But they can be noted with an edge of tone just as well as they can be noted with a bit of line art as well. Alright, and now, very quickly, let's go over how to get the base, volumes, and mapping we'll need for the back. So, starting with the same things from the front. The rib cage, pelvis, shoulders, elbows, etc. Now, down the back, draw a line down the contour of the spine and divide that into thirds. We only really need the bottom third marking. Then, from the center of the balls of the shoulders, draw a line out into the center towards that bottom third notch there, keeping it to the outer contour of where the body will be. Then, we'll draw the top edge of the shoulder blade. Now, where the collarbones go straight in, level, the shoulder blade's top edge goes in, but it's down slightly. And then, we're going to radiate out that rounded curve from the ball for the shoulder, and we're going to have that come to about halfway from the shoulder to the center of the spine. And as you do it, you can have a more curved shape, or if you want to have a more visible corner to it, you can have that around about 2/3 of the way down. And then, do the neck the same way you would before, starting with a little diamond shape that's level with where the collarbones would be on the front. And then add the trunk of the neck, and then decide how thick you want the traps to be based on how muscular they are. If they're very muscular, start them higher up the trunk of the neck. If they're not very muscular, start them further down. Next, halfway along the top edge of the shoulder blade, you then draw that line down over the arm to make the deltoid, and then have the tricep come up from the elbow and slip in between the shoulder blade and the deltoid. So, base volumes. Along the spine, divide down into thirds. From the balls to the shoulders, draw a guideline down to that bottom third. Draw the top edge, and have that come down slightly. Then, halfway between the ball and the spine, following the curve of the shoulder ball, you can do that inner edge of the shoulder blade, with a corner, if you want it, on the bottom third. Just like on the front, along that top edge of the shoulder blade, halfway along that is where the deltoid will start, and it'll wrap over down the arm, and then the tricep will come up from the elbow and slip between those two. For the neck, remember that little diamond, the bone that protrudes there, that's level with where the collarbones would be, and then do the trunk for the neck the same way. And then add the traps on the side, coming up higher or lower, depending how muscular the figure is. And with those shapes in place, you can see then, we can map out line art and a bit of tone, and we use those sketchy construction shapes to tell us where to apply that tone, but not necessarily where to apply line. Remember, we only really need to apply line when we're separating two objects because they're folding over or they're being separated in some other way. Now, moving through, let's have a look at how the muscles are structured. So we'll go through and do 4 figures. We'll do a male and a female from the front and the back, and we'll talk about how everything gets connected. So firstly, we'll construct these upper bodies with the same rules that we did just now. Also remembering that with the shoulders and the way we place them, the shoulders aren't placed level in line with the center, but rather they sit slightly back. So if you lean your back on a wall, your shoulders will touch. If you lean your front on a wall, your shoulders won't touch the wall unless you push them forwards. Your shoulders naturally sit further back. Now, with that basic method followed through, we'll build out the figures. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that the neck is based on the spine, and the spine sits at the back, so it sits towards the back of the skull, and then the flesh is built out from the front. Now, when someone gets a thicker neck, you won't get as much flesh built on the back of the spine, but you get a lot more built on the front of the spine. So when you thicken someone's neck, the neck will get closer to the chin, but it won't move much further back, because it's already at the back of the head. And of course, then with the upper arms, remembering that you can have them bulge to the first third, bulge to the next 2/3, they can be round at the top and straight, or they can even go inwards for the remaining 2/3 of the upper arm. You've got a lot of choices with how that part of the body is shaped, so make sure you're aware of what you're trying to do, whether they're muscular or slim, before you start shaping those. So to begin with, we're going to start placing the muscles, and we're going to think of them as though they have a length and then a point of connection. So in blue, I'll do the points that they bolt down to the bones, and in red, I'll do the lengths of them. So you can see here for the neck, I've got them coming from the corner of the jaw there. There's those 2 V-shaped muscles at the front, which is the sternocleidomastoid. Then there's the trunk of the neck, and then on the side, I've got the traps that are going to come around to the front and attach to that edge there of the collarbone. And now, with the pectoral, you'll notice that it's attached along all the edges around the top and center, but the attachment point on the side, which is what it's there for, is hidden underneath the deltoid. It actually goes in and slips under the deltoid and attaches to the bone of the arm, and it attaches flipped. Now, next thing, we're going to do a continuation out along the collarbone for how the deltoid connects. Remembering that these muscles will be slipping under and over each other. Then the bicep comes down and attaches, and then the tricep connects at the back, but it connects slightly higher than the bottom. You can see that with the bone of the elbow, where it'll come out at the back, so the tricep will sit a little bit higher. Then, coming down the side, we'll add the ladder muscles with their interlocking connection, and then behind them, a big flat sheet, and that's the muscle that comes all the way from the tailbone up around into the armpit, and that's the latissimus, that's the lats. Now, looking from the back, you can see we've got the definition here of the shoulder blades. They're a lot like the collarbones. They come in from the tops, but they angle down a little bit more. Now, when we build out the muscles in the back here, you can see there's one big muscle with a bit of a complicated shape. It connects all the way down the center with a little gap there for one of the vertebrae that poke out, and they connect along to the top edge there of the shoulder blade. And then once they get to the corner of the shoulder blade, they then all start pointing down, and they connect to the spine like that. And then on the other edge of the shoulder blade, we have the muscles that connect along to the arm. So the deltoid connects from the top of the shoulder blade down into the arm. And then on the back of the elbows, you can see that higher connection point there, where the triceps connect, and then they scoot under the deltoid. Then we have the big sheet of muscle, covers over from around the side, and connects to the back there. Now I'm noting this with the connection stopping just before the spine there. It does actually continue beyond that point, but it continues beyond that point as a flat sheet with no mass. So I'm going to end at there to note the end of the mass, but that's not the end of where the muscle goes. And then there's quite a few muscles that sit in that little gap there, just on top of the shoulder blade. I'm going to be simplifying them down just because there's a lot of detail there that if you really want to show it, you can, but it'll probably only show on a bodybuilder. So for the moment, I'm going to simplify that down to make it easier to read. Now, on a female character, the same thing will be true. The same connection points are going to be present in the neck. They're going to be present there on the pectoral, where it slips under the deltoid. But one of the things you'll notice is that they're there, but they may not necessarily disturb the silhouette as much. But they still need to be present because they're the structure that everything is built on. Same with the back. We'll have the traps joining from the shoulder blades into the center of the spine. We'll have the deltoid coming from the other edge of the shoulder blades, and the triceps as well, connecting down to the elbow with that lifted up section that they connect to. And then lats coming around the side and wrapping around towards the base of the body. Now, these can be a lot to keep track of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color code these so they're a bit easier to read. Now, this is a simplification of the muscles. There are a few of them I've grouped together because they form a lot of a similar function, and it's easy to keep track of them this way. So I'm going to color code them, and now I'm going to throw a bit of tone over them so you can see the kind of thing that they do to the shape of the figure. And you can see if you follow along those muscles, even if you don't pronounce them very much, like on the arms of the female character there, you can see they still pronounce a lot of depth and form, and they show how to connect the pieces together. So even if you're not describing the musculature, you can still use it to better connect the body from one part to another. Then, on the neck a little bit, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the details that occur behind the chin. Now, these are a bit hard to see unless the neck is tilted back, like the head is tilted back, or if the character is viewed from a low angle. But sometimes these angles can be a little tricky. So we have a base character here, we'll go with a fairly androgynous one, and you can see we've got them with their head tilted back, and we're seeing them from a fairly low angle. We're going to construct it out the same as we do from the front, where we add the sternocleidomastoid muscles, or that V-shaped muscle, that comes in from just under the ear, and then joins at those two corners of the collarbones. Then we're going to add this little blue notch in here. This is the hyoid. This is essentially the little bone anchor that's used to make that little dip where the skin goes in under the chin and then goes down. That's why there's that little indent in when you see the neck from the side. That's that little hyoid bone there. And what will happen is it'll have a couple of little muscles that essentially form a little sort of garrote that comes around the neck, and it joins to where the V-shaped muscles start, just below the ear, and also come forward and join the chin. And then from that down and out, you'll have these muscles here that come around the voice box. And those then will join the flow, that up and down flow, of the muscles of the trunk of the neck. And the muscles in the trunk of the neck actually extend down and join some of the ribs further down. And then, of course, we add the traps around the side that join to the top of the shoulders. And we can color code these, and you can see we'll start with the trunk of the neck is the bottom layer, those V-shaped muscles are the next layer up, and then the traps are the next layer. And then when we're viewing them from below, we can also see these muscles here that sit under the neck. We'll do them in red. And so these are the layers. We've got our trunk, our V-shaped muscle, and our traps, and of course we've got the muscles underneath the chin. You can sort of think of these if you imagine like a cyberpunk, where someone has artificial muscles. You can have them with their hyoid there, as the little bone anchor. You've got the collarbones down below, and you can then join those V-shaped muscles from below the ear, and then you can have the chin come down to the hyoid, and the hyoid go up into the corner there below the ear, and that's going to make that sort of garrote thing that pulls the neck in there. And then you've got the muscles coming out and down. If you've got a male character, the voice box will be a bit more pronounced, it'll come out a bit more, and then you just connect up the rest of the muscles with their anchor points where they go from and to. Remember that the traps have a bit of a sort of spin to them, a bit of a twist and a coil as they go around. And so then if we were going to have these as artificial muscles, we'll give them different colors, and you can see how they all structure. And if we drop some tone over the top of that, we can see how all the shapes are based on those muscle placements. And even if we remove all the cybernetic elements and the noted muscles, we've got all those shapes in place. And we also can see that we don't necessarily need to have line art around the edge of the jaw there. The shapes and shadows will complete that job for us. So we've got trunk of the neck, V-shaped muscles, little hyoid there that everything connects from and to in the front, and then everything coming down to those anchors of bone. So the bone bits will be in blue for the hyoid and the collarbone. Now the other thing is how to depict this. This is something I see quite often where people aren't sure how much of the edge of the face to depict. So you can see here with this, we've got the face looking up and there is a jawline there, but I'm going to leave that blank. I could leave it in, I'll put little stroke lines there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it out. And so now, if I complete a bit more of the drawing out, you can see these neck muscles and components are there. The hyoid is there, the V-shaped muscles are there, they're all there, and they're going to inform the shape of the shadow I do, but I'm not going to put line art there. You can see here, I'll just pop a bit of shading and that'll do the job. The reason why is, one of the ways I'll approach line art is whether it is there to show a division of objects. So if we're seeing the same chin from the front and from below, we won't have that occlusion, that division, where one plane comes in front of another. So in those cases, you can forego the line art if you want to. Now the next thing is to talk about how they'll change when the body moves. Like I said at the start, the body is shaped by the bones and then the muscles connecting to and from the bones, which will define that external shape. So here, we'll show what happens on a male character when we lift the arms up. One of the first things you'll notice is that when you lift the arms up, the collarbones have to lift. So if the arm lifts, the shoulder lifts. No exceptions. You can't lift your arm above your head without raising your shoulder and without raising your collarbones. That's how you do it. So in this case, as we raise that up, and if you remember how the muscles connect, since the pectoral connects from the center of the rib cage into a section of the bone in the upper arm, if you move the arms up, that point that they connect to has to move up as well. So then, if we were to reattempt this one with the balls for the shoulders raised and the collarbones, which is the joint that they use to hinge up, we start with the same connection point on the rib cage and on the collarbones to connect that muscle. We'll start with those little blue notches that we used to show where the muscles connect to and from. And also we'll pop some in on the bone of the upper arm to show where the pectoral is connecting to. And then when we draw out the fibers and connect them from those points, you'll see the shape that you'll get with the pectoral when it raises. And of course, with half of the collarbone being the point at which the deltoids connect, we then connect them up as well. Remembering that as the arm raises, it also rotates. So the deltoid sits over the top, but as you raise your arm, you rotate it, and that pushes the deltoid over towards the back. And then, from under the deltoid, we have the triceps, and then the biceps will also be visible there. And that'll help get the top part of the shape of the body. And then we construct the rest of it. So we'll do the V-shaped muscles on the front of the neck, and then the muscles that come down on the trunk, and the traps at the back there. We can also clearly see the lats under the arms, and then we'll transition from them into the ladder muscles that sit underneath them. And we then color them the same way we've got them colored in the reference to show that they're all the same bits. And we can do the same thing with the back. We'll have the muscles connect to the center, but you'll notice that the shoulder blades are going to rotate up. Just like the collarbones rotate up, the shoulder blades will also rotate up. And so we'll color them in the same way, and you'll see the deltoids get pushed around to the back. Like I said before, when you raise the arms up, you also rotate them. So that side of the upper arm that you'd see looking at someone from the side, when you raise your arms up, you now, if you want to see that deltoid, you have to go around to the back of them because it's rotated. And now we can pencil in a bit of tone to show how that works on a figure. And one of the things you'll see is when we've lifted that on, a few of the things we've gone over will really become apparent. So if we compare then the arms up to the arms neutral, these points are the same. They're both connecting from the collarbones and from the center of the rib cage into that section, that upper third of the bone of the upper arm. And we've rotated the deltoid around. If you imagine you had a little symbol on your shoulder there, that symbol would go from being on the side to being viewable from the back. And it's not at all visible from the front. And then we have the shoulder blade, which when you look at the back straight on, it looks pretty neutral, and the top edge comes down at about a little less than 45 degrees. But then when we raise the arm up, it also rotates. Just like the collarbone comes up, the shoulder blade also comes up. And in doing so, it compresses the top of the traps as well into the body, because all the muscles have a finite mass. They don't change size. They can change shape, but their mass will stay the same. They don't get bigger or smaller. So if they get compressed in, they have to thicken to accommodate that. As they get stretched out, they go flatter. And then we have the lats coming around the side that wrap all the way from the back up in under the arm. And those do technically start at the top of the tailbone. That's why part of the shoulders actually starts just above your butt. Now, trying this out very briefly on a female figure. You may not necessarily want to pronounce the musculature as much on them, you also may, but just like on the male figure, if the arms lift, the shoulders lift. And that means they hinge at the collarbones and come upwards. So we'll do the same thing. We'll map them out. We'll do the pectorals connecting those same spots along the center and along the top. And now as we've raised the arms, the deltoids get pushed around the back, just like they're on the male character, and the pectoral flattens out. Now, as you remember, since the boob is partly made of the pectoral, that's really going to change its shape as well. So, looking down at the pectoral, we've got how the pectoral connects to the bone there, and that's covered over by the deltoid. So remember that even though the pectoral doesn't continue all the way to the edge, underneath the deltoid, it does. Because that's what it attaches to, that's the thing that it moves. And then we do the neck as well, that V-shaped muscle on the front, the sternocleidomastoid. Then with the trunk of the neck, and we're going to have the traps as well. Now, with the musculature placed, now we have to decide on the boobs. So my general rule of thumb is that however big the mass of the boob is, I'll leave however much space that central mass takes up above it between the collarbone. So if they're really big, I'll have a large mass, and then the same height as that large mass I'll have as a distance between it and the collarbones above. Smaller ones will sit higher, larger ones will sit lower. And so you can see that part of the shape of the breast is going to be that edge of the pectoral, which we can still see. So if we follow that edge then, so halfway down the collarbone, we draw a line out and in for the edge of what will be the pectoral. That's going to form part of the mass of the breast. So we draw that line in, and then we do the V shape in the center to show where that mass stops, because the mass of the breast doesn't continue all the way up to the collarbone. And so we get rid of those excess lines, then we'll end up with the shape of where the breast would sit. Now, that will be slightly different when the arms are raised. So when the arms are raised, the pectoral changes shape, and since as we've discussed, the breast takes part of its shape and mass from the pectoral, that same thing will happen. We draw that line down from halfway along the collarbone to make the edge of the pectoral. That then now makes the edge of what will be the breast. And we'll just put some swimwear over them to keep the YouTube gods happy. And so with those sketches in mind, for all the shapes, we're going to go over and put some tone and line art on them. And we're going to use the information in those construction shapes to add things like the crease there, where the deltoid joins the pectoral. And we can also use it to define a bit of tone where the deltoid goes over the top of where the bicep and tricep come out from under the arm. So there it is. We've got the connection from the pectoral to the arm. We then do the deltoid over the top, and then we divide along the collarbone to find where it needs to connect to. And you can see the point it connects goes up because it's connecting to a part of the bone of the upper arm. And then we just place the deltoid over the top. And then, when we place the breast, we have part of its mass as part of the pectoral, and the rest of it being that upside down love heart shape. Now let's do it from the back as well. So we'll do another couple of figures, same rules. So head, balls to the shoulders, and the one on the left, we're going to have the arms raised. Now, when we're building out the shoulder blades, there's a couple of rules that are going to help us put them together. So firstly, once we've got that mass for the rib cage and the shoulders, we'd be able to see from the front where the collarbones are. Now the shoulder blades work in a lot the same way. So instead of having straight lines that come from the tops, they have lines that come down and in at a slightly shallow angle, not quite 45 degrees. And as the arms lift, that angle gets more pronounced. We can see what it would be like in blue for where the collarbones are compared to where the top edge of the shoulder blade is. So they're moving the same way and they're tethered at roughly the same points, but the shoulder blades start at already a kind of downward tilted angle along the top. Then, to get that inside edge of them, what you can do is you can divide the rib cage into thirds and then draw a line towards the bottom edge of the ball for the shoulder in to that point along the back, 2/3 of the way down. And that'll give you a good idea of where the bottom edge should be for the shoulder blades. And then, if you follow the top edge of the shoulder blades, and then essentially make a curved line that follows roughly the same curve as the ball for the shoulder, and it's roughly going to meet halfway along that line we drew as a guideline from the ball for the shoulder down to that point, 2/3 the way down the back. And this is a good way to get those shapes in, to get roughly where they should be, even when the shoulders are moved. Now, how they're shaped in the back. Just like on the male characters, we're going to have the traps come down from the spine. So the neck is where they're going to fan upwards, and then come across from the top edge of the shoulder blade. But once they hit that corner of the shoulder blade, then they start radiating out and down. And then we'll have that bottom edge, or where the lats are going to connect and wrap around the body. And you can see along the bottom there, they still connect into the spine, but there's that section, that upside down V shape on the bottom there, where the connection goes from being a massive muscle to just being thin tendon, where there's no actual muscle, but it still connects like a rope on the end of a pulley. And then on the top edge of the shoulder blades, we'll mark out where we're going to connect the deltoid into the arm. And then we have the muscles that go over the top of the shoulder blade, but again, I'm going to simplify them into one single mass. Only in really, really muscular figures will they come out as individual separate muscles. For the most part, those can be simplified together. There are other muscles that I'm already simplifying together. The reason I mentioned them is that they do go in relatively different directions. It's just they sit in an area of the body where they don't really pronounce themselves individually very much. And now, if we use that as a guideline to throw over some line art and some tone, you see we don't need to use line art to show that inside edge of the shoulder blades, but we can use the edge of a piece of tone, because they'll have a mass from the muscles that go over them and from their bone individually as well. And we also have that divot, that sort of carved in channel down the spine below that point of bone that comes out of the base of the neck there. So those are your main surface planes. You've got the bulges for the deltoid and the muscles below them. You've got that channel that goes down the spine, and then of course you've got the lats underneath. And so with that, we can shape the back and communicate it with tone instead of line. Now the next thing would be how we use this. So I'll sketch these figures out, and what I'll do is I'll have one character with their arm up and another character with their arms forward. Now I'm not going to draw out all the muscles every time. All those details of where those muscles are and where they connect, they're something that you want to build up an understanding of in your own head, so that you're seeing them in your mind's eye instead of actually applying them. So all these details and bits, they're a thing that you keep in your mind when you're building these shapes, knowing where these masses connect to and from. Remembering that the musculature isn't just these blobs that are stuck on the surface, they are a shape that has a start point and an end point. They start at one bone and go to another bone. That's how they work. That's how all muscles work. Muscles work by contracting and pulling two bones together. So every muscle then goes from one bone to another bone. If you know where those are, you can shape them at any position the body finds itself in. But of course, also remember that as they stretch and get longer, they then have to get thinner. Their mass does not change. They stay the same mass no matter what their position. They just may need to thin out. So for example, when the pectoral is stretched and when the arms are raised, there's no longer a bottom edge of line art or even shadow sometimes to the pectoral on the chest, because the pectoral muscle has been stretched so thin that that bottom edge has gone flat. And then when we have the arm forward, all these rules for how to map them will apply, but you'll have to apply them to a more conical shape. We'll round them and have them be foreshortened as they go around these objects. And of course, also remembering that as the arm lifts, the shoulder lifts. Now, another thing to talk about is the mobility of the shoulders. So with the shoulders, you can have them pushed forward, you can have them pushed back. Some of the things that'll happen when you push them forward is you'll see the shoulder blades come up. So for instance, if we have a character pushing their shoulders forwards, you'll start to see a bulge of the shoulder blade appear on the outer edge of the body. Or if we have a character who is leaning forward on their elbows, that will cause an upward push of the shoulder blades, and they'll come up and be visible against the line of the back. So when you're drawing a character with their arms in an interesting position or their neck, remember that it's all about those connections. If you can map those connections out and remember where the things weave in and out of each other, you'll have a good idea on how to place the musculature and how to shade the figure. So this one here we can use to illustrate that when the arms are raised right up like that, you can see how they interweave like a plait, with one going over the top of the other, and each of the muscles slipping between the gaps between other muscles to attach to the bones. That's how all of them work. So the next thing I want to chat about is the neck and how it's constructed. So if we have a figure and we've got their head here, one of the things to remember is where the neck connects to. So the neck doesn't just connect at the bottom in the center. The neck connects towards the back. If we do a skull here, and we have a look at it with a relatively realistic view of the skull, we can see that the spine connects towards the back of the skull. It's thick, but it connects towards the back. And if you look at the composition of the neck itself, most of the neck is fleshy towards the front of the spine, with very little at the back. That's going to affect how it bends back and how it bends forward. Since the neck is where the head is articulated, if you bend your head backwards, your neck will get longer. If you bend your head forwards, your neck will get shorter. A general idea of where to place it is if you imagine the full length of the head, the neck will tend to be towards the back half or back third of the head when it's in profile. Now another thing to talk about is how the neck and head move when you rotate your neck. So first thing is how you rotate your neck. So you've often seen on very muscular characters these big V-shaped muscles at the front of the neck there. Those are the ones responsible largely for turning your head left and right. So with both of those muscles attaching around to the skull below your ears and then attaching to your rib cage at the center point of your collarbones, if one of those has to get shorter, that turns your head. You can try this yourself by placing your thumb on the inside edge of your collarbone and your finger under your ear, and then when you turn your head, you'll notice your finger and thumb get closer to each other. But as you turn away, they have to stretch apart from each other. So that's what that muscle does. As it contracts, it rotates the head left and right. The thing to remember then is that since the skull is connected to the spine at the back, as you turn your head left and right, it will move left and right as well. Sort of like a flag. A flag is connected at one point and radiates out from one side. The head, while not quite that far, comes out forwards from the spine, meaning if you turn the head and the spine remains in the same position, the head will come out to the side. The next thing to talk about is how the neck bends when you tilt your head. So when you tilt your head, you don't just rotate your head at the top of a stick joint. What happens is each of the vertebrae in your neck will bend a little bit, and they will overall form a curve. Meaning if you rotate your head, so if you tilt your head, it doesn't just rotate in space and stay level. What happens is it also moves over to the side and moves down a bit. It moves around in a radial pattern. Now, those are the basics. So now I'm going to go through about a couple of sketches. I wanted to make a graphic that shows a lot of different positions of the shoulders and neck. So I decided I'd do a male one and a female one, and decided it'd be really helpful if I had one with the arms down, one with the arms forward, one with the arms back, and one with the arms up. And I thought it'd be really handy to have a couple of different angles. So I've done one from the front, the back, the side, and from a low angle and from a high angle. So I may have done 40 of them, and I've made a graphic for it. So let's walk through some of those now. Now, I'm not going to talk through all of them because we will be here all day. I want to touch base on a few of the important parts just as we go through. The first one then is this one here of the female figure from the front with the arms raised. One of the other things you'll notice is as the arms lift, the shoulders lift. And since the pectorals are attached to the arms, then the pectorals will lift. And since the pectorals form part of the mass of the breast. As the arms lift, the breasts will come up as well. It also means that you tend to bend your back a little bit. Try it now. If you put your elbows above your head, you'll notice you'll bend the spine back a little bit naturally. What that does is it tilts your spine backwards, and since the breasts come out from the ribcage, if you tilt the ribcage back, they don't just come out, they'll now come out and up. Now the next one I want to have a look at is we've got the arms coming forwards. So here you can see to raise your arms forwards, you have to also lift your shoulders up. You can't just place your arms forward and keep your shoulders down. You have to lift your shoulders to move your arms forwards. What that means is the collarbones will come up, and also means that the pectorals will stretch. So here we have a character leaning her arms forwards, and that then means the pectorals will stretch up into the arms, but it also means that these muscular shapes are going to be wrapping around the cylindrical forms of the arms as they come towards the viewer, which means those shapes wrapping around will now be wrapping around in 3 dimensions as they wrap around the cylinders that are coming towards us. Sort of like the label on a Coke can. If you look at a Coke can from above or below, that will warp the lines on the outside of the can. The same thing's going to happen here on the arms as they come forward. And then of course, we have the breasts on top of the pectorals, since part of the mass of the breast is the pectoral. And I'm going to color code them with different colors so you can see what they are. Now the female one will have a mass for the breast. You'll notice I don't have lines on it because it doesn't have structure like the musculature does. And so now I'll go through the other ones. I've got the side view, so same things will apply. This is a good way of having a look at where the neck connects to the skull as well, remembering that the neck connects towards the back. And then, on the side view here, of the girl with her raised arms, you can see that it really pushes a bulge for the collarbones and also the deltoid as they both get pushed around to the back and compressed. But then, when I have the girl from the side, with her arms coming forwards, you can see that the deltoid wraps around and stretches down the arm, but you can also see how much it pronounces and how much it pulls out that mass for the shoulder blade. And then color coding all of them. Now, on the figure from behind, you can see that as we have the figure in a neutral position, the shoulder blades will tilt down a little bit. But then, as we have the figure with the arms raised, you can see how the deltoids will compress, and the shoulder blades will rotate up and out, and they'll come out towards the front and become visible. And then, as the character has their arms raised out to the side, you can see we might see a bit of the boob coming around, depending on the size, and we can see how the lats and the shoulder blades are going to come in and affect the silhouette. The arms don't just pop out the side of the ribcage, there's also the shoulder blades to consider, and that little notch there you can see is really going to help the silhouette read as a character with their arms out. And then color coding those. Now next we get to the low angle. Now with a low angle, it's important to remember that since things like the breast will sit above the outer edge of the ribcage, as you view the ribcage from a lower angle, they will sit higher. If you imagine you've planted a flag on a sphere, as you rotate the sphere around, the flag you have will really pronounce its movement more than the outer edge of the sphere, since it comes out further and will move more. So, the breasts, when viewed from the low angle, will come up and they'll even cover over sections of the neck and collarbone quite readily, even if they're not massive. And so the same thing here, we map out the pectorals on the character with their arms up from a low angle, and then we join those shapes in to the mass of the breast. Then we color code those. Now the next one to have a look at is this character with their arms up from a low angle. We can see before we add the breast tissue that because of the angle we're viewing them from, a lot of the muscles will get a lot more visual real estate or a lot less as we change the angle we're viewing the body from. So for instance, you can see that from a low angle, we see a lot more of the lats, the latissimus, that blue one under the arm, but we don't see very much of the deltoid because the deltoid sits on top and we've got the arm raised, so we see very little of it. And then the trapezius, the traps, we don't see them at all. In fact, from a low angle, it's actually kind of hard to see the traps at all, just because they sit towards the back. And since we're viewing the front of the character from below, we're not going to see them very much at all. Now, when we go to viewing the characters from a high angle, you can see that here, if we've got the characters from a high angle with their arms down, arms up, arms forward, and arms out, we're going to see a lot more of things like the deltoid. In fact, the deltoid's going to be quite prominent when we're looking at these characters and how they're put together. So, looking first then at, of all these characters, the character with their arms coming forward from below, we can see that even though the deltoid's being compressed, since we're seeing them from a high angle, we're seeing a decent amount of the deltoid. And then before we put the coverage over the breast, we're not seeing very much of the lats, and then we're seeing even less of them once the breast tissue is added on top. And then once the arm is raised, we can see the character from a high angle with the raised arms, we're seeing a lot of the underarm, but we're not seeing almost any of the deltoid. So a lot of these muscles, especially the deltoid, will move around as the arm moves. Now, we're going to move on to the male characters. Now we're going to go through the same ones with these, so front, side, back, high angle, low angle. The ones to pay, I guess, particular attention to with the male figures is looking just how much the deltoid and pectorals move when you move the arm. They're the ones responsible for moving the arm, so they're going to be the ones that have the most motion when you move the body around. So here we see the basic view from the front. We've got the character with all the muscles laid out, remembering where they connect from and to, and also remembering that the pectoral connects not just to that corner of the arm, but it goes through that little corner underneath the deltoid, and it connects to the bone of the arm. And then when we see the arm raised, we can see it's moving towards still that point on the arm bone, and that's why it's stretching out so far and flattening that bottom edge of the pectoral. So no matter how beefy they are, no matter how big their pectorals are, once they raise their arms up, it flattens and thins out. You'd have to have some sort of rigid object under there for that not to happen. Or, in the case of a female character, they have an independent fatty mass, which does still stretch a bit because the skin is stretching and holding it flat and part of the muscle is stretching, but it still has a separate mass that can maintain its form. Whereas on a chest without breast tissue, you'll have it flatten out. No matter how muscly it is, it will still flatten out. Now moving on to some of the side views, the one I want to draw particular attention to with these is going to be the view of the arms down and arms up, and seeing just how much of a difference there is in which muscles you do and don't see, and how much of the underarm you see when the arm is up. Obviously you do see the underarm when the arm is raised, but it's important to realize what all of that detail is. Now, I've simplified this, but this is a really good starting point for getting those base forms for those larger shapes and the more broad volumes under the arm for making those shadows and forms. Moving on then to the back, this is an area of the body that I think doesn't get quite as much love. So one of the big things I want to draw your attention to with these, we can see it here with just the sketches, that the shoulder blades will move quite a lot when the arms move, because they're one of the things that articulate the arm. Just like the collarbone moves a lot, because that's one of the things that articulates the shoulders also articulate on the back by the scapula or shoulder blades. So when you move the arm around, make sure that part of what you're moving is that scapula, that shoulder blade, because it's responsible for moving it. If you don't move it, it'd be like moving a car without moving the tires. The tires are how it gets there. The tires are where it actually moves from. And now, once we've got those forms out and we start color coding them in, we can see that we've got the larger groups of muscles and the more complicated one being the traps, with it having a bit of a unique shape of all the muscles, with it connecting along that top ridge of the shoulder blade all the way along to the spine, except for that little gap there, we've got that bony protrusion. That bony protrusion, as a sort of, just a bit of an aside, it's kind of a unique little anchor point for a lot of the detail of the muscle on the back. I think one of the things that really shows that this is such a big important thing is that in media, that little bit of anatomy keeps getting used as a focal point. So you've got things like, that's the weak point in Attack on Titan, that's where the things go in Neon Genesis with little sort of the plug capsule things. And so it's one of those little defining little features where a lot of the muscles lead to and from it. And also, it's this little bony protrusion in the middle of all this sort of sea of muscle. And then as we move through things like the low angle view, you can see how the pectoral is still pulling in to that bit in the arm there. But then the muscles on the side, like the traps and the lats, they're moving a bit. And then we have those little ladder muscles there that don't really move all that much. And of course, then we have the body from a high angle. And a lot of the same thing will happen here. The one I'd like to draw your attention to primarily with these is going to be the arms forward from a low angle. With any of them where the arms come forward, you're going to have a lot more foreshortening in space, as that cylindrical shape of the arms comes towards the viewer, meaning that as you map those lines, those features around the surface, you're going to have to map them around more of a cylindrical shape. And there we have it. We've got our infographic with all the information we need to have a starting reference for male and female forms from the front, side, back, high angle, low angle, with arms out, arms back, arms forward, arms up. Hopefully this will be a really good starting point for you if you need a reference of how to do a part of the neck and shoulders in a different angle or from a different sort of perspective, and it'll give you some starting information to use. I hope it's worth the work. It took a minute or two. The runtime on the footage of this was a bit, but hopefully this is going to be something that's going to be really useful to you. It'll be linked down in the description. If you want to have this, you can use it as a wallpaper. Good luck finding your icons, but maybe have a clean desktop. Alright, and with that, we're finished. So I hope this has been useful for you when you're drawing things like the neck and shoulders. The next thing I go into is going to be the torso, which is going to be mapping out things like the chest and back and abdomen. That one should hopefully be out a little bit sooner, unless scope creep grabs me and takes me away. I've also got a really cool review coming up for something really nifty. And overall, if you like the video, if you like what I do, and you want to see more of it, and you want to see it more often or more reliably, then consider liking, subscribing. Like I said before, YouTube's doing some sort of adpocalypse thing again, just to keep everyone on their toes, and that's fine. But if you do want to do the like and subscribe thing or comment, now will be a lovely time. Let me know any questions you have. I do still read all the comments. I haven't been able to get back and answer all of them like I used to because, numbers. But I do read through all of them. If you do have any questions, pop them in there, and ideas for videos of things you'd like to see. You are the people that these videos are for, so if you have an idea, you're exactly the person I want to hear from. That idea you have is exactly the kind of thing I want to hear. To find if that's a thing people want to sort of have me make, I'll put that together. Now, I won't take any more of your time. You have a great day. I'll see you in the next one. You have gone. Cheers.